I'm Michael Damiani, and I have finished Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity.
I am Brad Ellis, and I have finished Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity.
I am Roger from RogersBase, and I have finished Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity.
I'm Valbuena from GameXplain, and I've also finished Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity.
This is your final warning. Spoiler mode starts now.
Spoiler mode, final warning, spoiler mode, activated.
Hello everyone, welcome to a new spoiler mode from Easy Allies. We're going to be talking about Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. I'm your host and moderator, Michael Damiani. I'm joined by Brad Ellis.
Yo!
Roger from RogersBase.
What's going on, everybody?
And Valbuena from GameXplain. How's it going?
Ahoy, folks.
Yeah!
There's my thing.
We are here to talk about this game. But as we were talking before, I am just completely enthralled with Triss's collection back there of the Korok stuff. That I just like now I was like, I have to have these. I was like, these are so cool.
I got them both at conventions. I got this at a convention. It's a hat. I'm not wearing it now because the headphones completely distort it. But I don't actually remember which booth I got that at. But I do know I got this one, which shakes, at PAX East.
I love it. I'm just jealous because I've always loved the Koroks, especially in Breath of the Wild. I mean, I grew up with Wind Waker, so I loved him in that.
Yep,
but Chris made me this little Makar amiibo a while ago. You can't really see it because the green screen thing is still on. And so I've always wanted more Korok stuff. So literally when we started the call and I saw all that in the background, I was losing my mind silently.
Well, Koroks do appear in Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, but I don't think we're here to start talking about Koroks right off the bat. Maybe we'll get to Koroks later.
We'll get to them.
Yeah. But I pulled some patron questions. I asked our patrons what they wanted us to answer about this game because I knew they wanted us to talk about the story, all the aspects of the story. And as expected, a bunch of the first questions all asked about the same thing. So I just kind of went in order here, and whoever put it the most succinctly. But thank you to everyone who submitted questions, the similar types of questions. Just know that I'm trying to capture the spirit of the question here with who I picked. So the first one comes from Aiden. Were you all disappointed by the direction the story went, and do you think Nintendo should have marketed this game differently than a prequel?
That's tough. I mean, I was looking forward to seeing what happened during the Great Calamity when I saw the first trailer for this game. But I think, one, Terraco's just adorable. Like, BB-8, R2-D2, whatever you want to call Terraco. Like, I love Terraco. And so I think the cuteness of Terraco sort of overrode any issues that I had initially. And then, again, this is spoiler mode, so we can talk about everything, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
By the time the future champions came back into it, and I was thinking about the story repercussions of, okay, well, they're going to have to go back in time then to their original timeline by the end of the game. What is that going to mean potentially for the sequel to Breath of the Wild that we already know about? And I love Sidon, literally one of my favorite characters in all of Zelda history. So I was screaming when I saw that he was going to be playable. And I was stoked. I think by the ending of the game, it sort of paid everything off for me.
Yeah, I definitely think that a lot of the disappointment most people feel really does comes down to how this was marketed, of this was the prequel to Breath of the Wild, and it isn't. It takes place during when would be the prequel, but
right.
I think that specific take on the marketing is why there are people disappointed. But then again, if you don't market it that way, you're inherently going to spoil a lot of what's going to happen.
Yeah,
so
that does seem like a big issue.
This way.
Yeah, Damiani,
I loved it.
Yeah, when I booted this up, and I found out it was kind of like an alternate timeline thing, I was like, man, come on. I wanted to see the actual story, but at the same time, I'm, used to the Zelda timeline of being convoluted and no one knowing what's going on all the time. So I'm like, it's just another split timeline.
Yeah.
But part of me does wish it was actually tied into the Breath of the Wild timeline, I would say. But at the end, I was okay with it.
The one question I sort of want to pose to y'all is that if this was the actual Great Calamity, right, the full-on prequel that leads into Breath of the Wild, really the only thing that would have been different is Aster still would have been present, because he's the fortune teller that's alluded to in Breath of the Wild that's going to foretell the Great Calamity. So that still would have happened. They would have just lost to Calamity Ganon, and the future champions wouldn't have been there. Literally everything else is pretty much the same. I mean, if they want to do like DLC for the game and eventually have it of like, oh, this is what actually happens in that timeline, I could see them potentially doing that. But I mean, on the whole, it's like we know what would have happened based on playing the game. We could assume, okay, Aster just would have gotten what he wanted, and the Calamity would have happened, and that would have led into the events of Breath of the Wild. So I really feel like seeing a different take on it was kind of fun. And going to what you were saying, Brad, right, with the whole thing with the timeline split, right, is this is not the first time Zelda's done this. Like, the official Zelda timeline that's in the Hyrule Historia or whatever it's called splits off with Ocarina of Time, and then even then there's like, oh, there's a timeline in which a character dies at the game over screen at one point, and that splits off. So to me, it's like, if you're going to add a timeline split after Breath of the Wild, which has already been set up as the furthest game in the timeline, right, officially, split it now. That's fine. Then create a timeline from here where you create another split, and you've got the Breath of the Wild ending, right, that we're going to see the continuation of in Breath of the Wild 2, and then you've got what happens here and the timeline split. So, yeah, I don't really see an issue with it.
Yeah, and I think that's also good to point out, too, where you mentioned how a lot of it would end up being the same, like with Aster. Though, I guess he wouldn't have Harbinger Ganon with him, so I guess his power may not have been as strong. But,
well, that ties in... Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was going to say that ties directly into the trailer for Breath of the Wild 2, though, is we see a corpse underground that's gotten the life sucked away from them with a headdress thing that looks exactly like Aster's. But some people were saying early on, like, that's probably going to be Ganondorf. And now in this game, we saw, like you said, Harbinger Ganon, but Calamity Ganon still had to exist in some way. So who's to say Calamity Ganon didn't just take over Aster, and the corpse that's been sucked away in the bottom of the underground of Hyrule is actually Aster having been taken control of by Calamity Ganon?
It's definitely possible. But yeah, the only real difference we would have gotten is just a tragic end that you just can't feel happy at, which I understand people wanting, but I feel like for a Zelda game would have been really different and really risky to do.
I have my own follow-up questions to this because I'm kind of curious what you feel. You opened the discussion with the timeline split. This game brings the concept of split timelines back. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about the fact that the Breath of the Wild Breath of the Wild kicks off like a new style of Zelda, and seems like the direction they're going to be going with the new 3D Zeldas in the mainline series. To me, it felt like a fresh start potentially, but right with the first game that comes out that's canonical to it's part of the canon, we go right back to timeline splitting and stuff like that. How do you feel about that?
It doesn't really bother me much, Damiani, because it's a Warriors game. Like, they have to make it kind of be different, I guess, and like having characters time travel, they do that for the purpose of it being a Musou game.
Right.
So you could have playable characters, actually.
Yeah.
I think they wanted to tie it in and make it more interesting, like some way to connect to it, which I think worked, like got me invested in it. But at the end of the day, it still is a Musou game. So I think just kind of going off the rails at some points is all right.
Yeah, I think, as mentioned earlier too, timeline splits are nothing new to Zelda. And timelines and time travel in general isn't new to Zelda. I mean, look at Skyward Sword, which was made to be the origin game.
Right.
And the whole premise of Skyward Sword is, or at least in the end, is, oh, we gotta go back in time and beat him again, even though we just beat him. So, when you really look at it that way, I think I'm almost kind of glad they're still doing something with time travel, because that's always been such a big part of Zelda, whether to a small degree or a very large degree with whole games based around the concept. So it's nice to see that they're not afraid to keep some of the Zelda lore and charm that we've come to know and love, or hate in many people's cases, of the series. They're still keeping it with Breath of the Wild. And with how Breath of the Wild to so many people was very mixed on if it truly felt like a Zelda game to them, I kind of like this edition, which definitely feels more Zelda, tying it all back together into this world.
Absolutely. I think that was one big reason, too, why I wasn't like as connected to the original Hyrule Warriors, because it was cool that you had all these characters from all the different iterations of Zelda, and they all had sort of one key art style, but at the same time, it did look like they were taken from like a whole bunch of different realms, and it didn't really feel like it was in the same world. Whereas this does still feel as if it's in the world of Breath of the Wild, because it is. Going back to the time travel thing, though, it depends on how much of this they're going to make canon, right? We know that they worked really closely with the Zelda developers, so obviously there are things in this game that are going to be tied to the story of Breath of the Wild 2, even if it's basic things that are going to be fleshed out. Like, we know now that Koga had a right-hand man with Suga, so we're like, okay, we'll probably find out something else about that in the lore of the Iga clan in Breath of the Wild 2. But I think the real question is if the champions that are sent back to the original Breath of the Wild timeline remember defeating Calamity Ganon in the past. All the stuff with Terraco, everything that happens in this game. Because if that's the case, and the corpse underground in the Breath of the Wild 2 trailer, like I said, is Aster or some other iteration of Ganon, and they go to the future champions that are still alive in the Breath of the Wild timeline that were then sent to the past to deal with him, to be like, hey, we've actually beaten them already. This is what happened in this other game. We're going to help you take him down because we've dealt with Aster already. I think that could be really interesting, and that would have a reason to have all the time travel in Age of Calamity.
I see that. I just don't see Nintendo tying in Zelda that much. Like, the stories together, I feel like they always just kind of do maybe a little bit. You're tying in a little bit. I don't think they're gonna tie it in so. You might get small little nods here and there. I think from playing Hyrule Warriors, you're like, oh yeah, I remember that little thing from this. I don't think it'll be anything too substantial, though.
I think the most we might see. Sorry to.
No, go ahead.
I think the most we might see is somewhere early in the game. We might see these champion descendants, or the future champions, properly named the new champions for the Divine Beasts, even if it doesn't play heavily into plot outside of they're now the defenders of Hyrule because they've proven themselves, and maybe in doing so they. Even if it's just, I don't know, like Zelda knighting them and mentioning defeating the Calamity twice over or something. Like, a small nod to the fact that it definitely happened, but not directly showing that it happened.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's more, to me, that's more plausible. I'll say this because I know people are like, why are you saying anything, Damiani? Because we had an episode of Friend Code about this last week, and we didn't get into spoiler territory. But obviously, the time travel thing happens in the very beginning of the game, so we did discuss the impact of time travel in the Breath of the Wild, the trilogy so far, because of the 3 games we have that are one still yet to come. And I said my take on it was pretty much this. My strongest belief is that the timeline thing is it's an out for Nintendo now. Now they saw what happened with the past 30 plus years, almost 35 years of the Legend of Zelda series before Breath of the Wild. They saw all their ultimate solutions were time travel, split timeline. So they're like, you know what? Let's just make one now. Let's rip that Band-Aid off. Let's have a second timeline, and we'll dump. If we make a great game, but it doesn't follow some of the story stuff, dump it in the other timeline. So they don't have to deal with that question all the time. It's like they just want to deal with that, and they've never liked being paid into a corner when it comes to story with the Zelda series. They want to do what they want to do, and also I think it's partly just the other half of it is that they wanted to have fun. I think they wanted to surprise people at this game, and from what I understand, a majority of Musou games are generally very positive with their story, like the resolutions, their conclusions, essentially, and that they're supposed to be feel good at the end, and that's what this is. So that's a little bit of apparently the Koei Tecmo influence there, is that you get to see these characters shining and having their moment. So that's kind of my 2 reads on it, but I don't rule out anything, honestly, when it comes to Nintendo. I just I think it'll be nice to see what they do, but yeah,
I think especially in terms of the Breath of the Wild world as well, because I mean Breath of the Wild was such a huge success for them. Like, you look at the sales figures of Breath of the Wild, even Age of Calamity, it sold 3 million in the first weekend or something wild like that. So I mean, obviously they see there's money to be made in the Breath of the Wild universe, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with the GDC talk they did a couple years ago, talking about setting up the world of Breath of the Wild, and initially it was a lot more futuristic looking. Obviously, we had the Master Cycle in the DLC, but Link was on a motorcycle, and there were these Guardian UFO-looking things, and everything looked super futuristic. I almost see this as an excuse where if they want to make a super futuristic Breath of the Wild type game, they could maybe even do it off of this timeline. Because then you're in a Hyrule that didn't suffer from, the calamity for 100 years, where there was no Link and all this other stuff. So technology could have just, taken off over the course of those 100 years. And you have some really futuristic-looking Zelda game on one hand. Meanwhile, you've got the world that did deal with the calamity and the champions that have faced what happened in that timeline in the actual mainline Breath of the Wild timeline. I feel like this is an excuse, kind of like what you were talking about, is ripping the Band-Aid off and saying, we're going to do time travel eventually, but this leaves it open to a lot of different options for having another Zelda game in the world of Breath of the Wild, because I don't think they want to step away from this anytime soon.
Yeah.
And that's kind of crazy to look at, too.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Really quick thing.
Yeah.
As I think it's crazy to look at Breath of the Wild that way, too, because as a Zelda series, the most we ever got out of one world of Hyrule was maybe 2 adventures, kind of.
Right.
Usually it was just the same Link, but not even the same world, or not even the same area. Look at Phantom Hourglass, for example. So to have what is now currently a trilogy, even though there's a split timeline in it, you're still working with the same world and a lot of the same pretenses with it. There's a lot you can do there, and I think it really is a new, I guess the best way to put it is a new chapter for the Zelda series, because if they're doing a trilogy in one world, despite a timeline split, which now is, as Roger mentioned, they could always do more in the Age of Calamity timeline as well.
Sure.
Who knows how much they'll actually do with this one era of Zelda, and I think that's really interesting.
Especially because this game is more than any other game in the history of the Zelda franchise. This is Zelda's story. When you are playing through the story of this game, the connections with Terraco and everything, this is Zelda's story. So if they do actually want to make a game where they're like, hey, Zelda's the main character, branch it off with this. Do it. Go off.
Ironic, because it's one of the few Zelda games to not have The Legend of Zelda in the title.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yep. Man, I feel like I can talk about the possibilities here forever for the sequel. I do want to shift gears a little bit and ask you about a different element of this game. And I got a question from Kerbu. It has to deal with the villain. So Kerbu writes, I'm more than content with this tragedy-free pseudo prequel we wound up getting, but a sticking point for me that sours the climax is Calamity Ganon. Their straightforward appearance and lackluster fighting style feel more akin to just needing a tangible final boss and unlockable character than something that actually feels appropriate for the game. Either Harbinger Ganon or a malice-corrupted Aster seem as though they could have been a better fit for this alternate tale with a little more development. How did the panel feel about our final villain, and did anyone bother going to distance to unlock old Malice Akuma before signing off?
So I'll hop right on this, because that's the character I was going to mention offhand that I just unlocked randomly. I was doing one of the side missions, and it's you battle Calamity Ganon and the Blights or whatever, and you get Calamity Ganon as a playable character, and you start playing as him, and you're like, whoa, this is amazing. You're throwing malice all over the place and absorbing things, and also, I wanted to jump on this too, because I hard disagree with the idea that this version of Ganon isn't cool. Because I definitely, and you can go back and watch my playthrough and see this when it happened, I definitely was like, wow, I wish this was the final boss of Breath of the Wild. Because I was so disappointed with how easy the final boss in Breath of the Wild was, and how Calamity Ganon, especially if you've taken down all the divine beasts, he gets half of his health taken away or something, and it made that fight way too simple. And so for me, going through the process of Aster and then Harbinger Ganon and watching Terraco die and then Aster getting what he deserves by being turned into the vessel for Calamity, and then finally seeing Calamity Ganon, this giant malice looking version that you'd expect to see out of a Ganondorf, it was exactly what I wanted. So yeah, I wasn't disappointed at all.
Yeah, I definitely kind of parroting a lot of what you said there. It really wasn't disappointing to me to see him that way. It felt the most menacing that he's looked in this form. Well, I do think the giant cloudy form that surrounds Hyrule Castle does look really menacing, but I don't know how you would fight that. But this humanoid form was a lot more menacing than this giant bug kind of thing that he was in Breath of the Wild, and then the giant pig Ganon that basically just took your attacks and attacked forward.
Right.
It was more cinematic than anything else. And while it was definitely cinematic in Age of Calamity, it also felt more fitting to what we're used to seeing in Zelda. And I think I would say the villains, I think the only part that was really disappointing was Aster himself, and the only reason why I'm disappointed by that is even the gallery makes it seem like you know more about him than you actually do.
Right.
So, because it lists him as like coming from a certain small village in Hyrule. Where? Lurlin, the little like fishing village you never visit? Like
Right.
it doesn't go into any of that at all. He has all this Gerudo stuff on, and I think maybe they want to do that as DLC, or they should do that as DLC to explore his background, and then he's there as a playable character. Kind of like what they did with Sia in the original Hyrule Warriors, where that was kind of how you saw how she developed as a villain. And I think that would do a lot of justice for Aster and potentially this take on Calamity Ganon with Harbinger Ganon, and even the Yiga clan. Because I think if they don't, Aster himself is like the weakest link to the game, I think.
Yeah.
Because Ganon, I think, was totally fine, but Aster himself didn't really do much outside of give us a really dark scene where he's ripping out souls of the Yiga clan. That's really about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was okay with Ganon in this, Damiani. Like, Ganon, like, after Breath of the Wild, Ganon wasn't, like, this kind of personal thing that you had with that you actually talk to, or he, like, never speaks. He's just, like, pure evil at this point. So the fact that he was that, just kind of in a different form, I thought was totally fine and appropriate.
Yeah, I've always viewed it as, I had a lot of trouble reconciling how Calamity Ganon was portrayed even in the original game, and it was nice to see the humanoid form with Harbinger Ganon in this. Is like,
sure.
Just, I was like, it was half the equation was I was disappointed by the form. Yeah, the swirling cloud around Hyrule Castle was cool, but as you said, Tris, we never were going to fight that, and it wasn't like the threat. It was that bug mechanical thing, puppet-looking thing. I was like, okay, that's this is not what I thought. Even like I kind of got worried when I saw all the blights. I was like, is this what the final Ganon's going to look like? One of these? Like, all right, here we go.
The blights, by the way, in this game are awesome. Like, every single blight fight is super fun, because you learn their tactics, kind of like you're playing a Dark Souls game or something like that, to a much lesser extent. Obviously, it's in a Warriors universe. But it's really fun to, like, learn their counters, then parry them, then do the flurry attack, and, you know, have the right elemental attacks to take them down. It was great. Yeah.
Yeah, I liked how they preserved like their move sets pretty much from the game. They did like this game's best thing it does is the nailing the feel of authenticity. Even though it's a Musou game wrapped in Breath of the Wild, like in every way, and it does its best to disguise itself as that, and I really appreciate that for it, because I think it makes it not just more accessible for newer people who are jumping into a Musou game for the first time, but also eases Zelda fans who are like, oh, this isn't really a traditional Zelda game, it's a Musou game, but we're trying to make you as comfortable as possible. So I really did appreciate that. But for Ganon though, like I've always wanted more character development for Ganon. That was like where I felt the most lacking in Breath of the Wild. But I also reconciled it, I was trying to allude to earlier, is that I understood this game, okay, it's at the end of the timeline, or it's just so far removed from everything, and this spirit of Ganon has just endured, the spirit of Demise reincarnated as Ganon has just endured, and the story is like, it just cared about winning. It cared about, like, it has one singular focus, and now it's mindless. It's just this mindless, almost shapeless form. And I was like, okay, I kind of get that, but when Age of Calamity started to, like, it showed me Harbinger Ganon, and I was like, an Aster, I'm like, wait, is there more to this? I'd really love to have more of this explored. So your idea, Tris, of having potentially the DLC be like a villain DLC to explore that, would love that, because it's like what in the original Breath of the Wild, it's like the one line from Urbosa about she heard that like Ganon was originally descendant of the Gerudo, and that it fell on her shoulder. She feels a responsibility. I'm like, that's more of what I want from this, and that's what I want from the sequel too, hopefully. But well, I'm with you. I'm with you with the question here, that it was nice to see it, but at the same time, I want more.
Yeah, I think we will get it out of the sequel. Again, that's like the one thing we've seen of the sequel game is them bringing Ganon, Aster, whatever that thing is, to life. So that's going to be answered at some point. I also, though, parrot everybody else, I think Triss's idea of having like the DLC be the entire story of Aster would be great. Like, you see that fleshed out, may give you a little bit of a teaser for Breath of the Wild 2. And it is strange having now unlocked every character that Aster's not playable, when, like you said, he's got a gallery panel and everything. It just it does seem like they're leaving it out specifically so they can build out that DLC. Same with Robbie and Purah. I truly expected they were going to be playable at some point. I was surprised they weren't.
I had this weird moment with Robbie and Purah, and outside of there's a few levels where they're on the field as NPCs. Usually you have to save them or help them, but there's one level where you're saving the Akala Citadel, and you have to help Robbie, and then a Malice Guardian falls in from the ceiling. I had this really funny moment where as Mifa is yelling at Robbie, like, stand back, he's rushing towards it, so it just swipes and, like, sends him across the room. But I also noticed he kept rushing at it, and then I noticed Purah would do the same. So I started realizing it's almost like they have the same behaviors as the playable characters as NPCs.
Right.
They will follow the enemies and, like, try to stay at them, but then they don't attack, like, they can't. And I had this really weird moment when I was searching for Korok seeds in the end of Chapter 6, where Zelda unlocks her powers. And you have the whole little thing where you have to guide Purah across the whole battlefield. And then she kind of panics because Thunderblight Ganon starts coming at her. And since I was looking for Koroks, I figured, okay, I'm going to leave her be, and I'm going to find this Korok. And I spent like 15 minutes looking for it. And then after finally finding this Korok, I was playing as Link, and I had Zelda and Impa in Fort Hateno. So they were defending the fort. Nobody was by Purah. If I zoomed in on the map, there was nobody there. So I finally decided, okay, somehow she hasn't lost any health, but I'll go help her out now. Thunderblight Ganon was missing a third of his health. There was nobody around except Purah. I don't know what she did, but she did something that was working.
Oh, man, yeah. I know the speculation is that why would they go to this work if they're not going to be playable at some point?
Yeah.
So the DLC, we shall see for sure.
How many DLC characters did we get in the original Hyrule Warriors?
Oh,
Too many.
Yeah, we got a lot.
Was it too many? It was like 6, I think.
So we
5?
had
Yeah,
in the original Wii U release, there was Sia, Volga, and Wizro, who were added as like free DLC shortly after release to give you the kind of the villain's take. And then we had the Twilight Princess pack that added Twilight Midna, and then the Majora's Mask pack that added Young Link and Tingle. And then a year later, we had Hyrule Warriors Legends, which added the 5 characters, like 3 from Wind Waker, the Skull Kid, Linkle, and then that had its own DLC, adding like 4 or 5 characters.
Wow.
So, yeah, there was a lot of characters throughout basically 4 years of the original Hyrule Warriors.
Yeah.
I mean, if they have such a huge install base for this at this point, right, and they've already sold so many, I would be shocked if they don't do that again then. If this is already the best-selling Warriors game of all time.
Yeah, really.
And they put that much work into the original one, yeah.
If you want to look at that, there you go. That's like all the packs they ever had.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. But no, Trish got like pretty much all of it there. But yeah, way too much. But I mean, I think that was the direction of the original game. It was supposed to be a celebration of everything Zelda. They wanted everything to be in there. Where this is definitely a more crafted, refined experience, and it didn't make sense. I mean, I think there was like maybe some speculation, especially when now it was like time travel, that now they can go wild, like they could. But after playing it, I don't think they're gonna bring in like Skyward Sword characters or something like that.
Yeah.
No. I think it'll be like if they do add more characters beyond the 3 obvious ones, Robbie, Purah, and Aster, I could see them maybe doing Beetle. Would be kind of funny to have like the shopkeeper running around.
I think they do Suga as well.
Oh, Suga would be likely as well too, I think, especially considering, he had a pretty fleshed out story among the Yu clan and then nothing came of it. I truly thought Suga at some point was going to be playable. But yeah, you're probably right, saving him for DLC.
Those 4 probably, yeah.
Yeah.
But speaking of characters, I want to ask about a certain main character and their portrayal. Several community members wrote in about this. I picked Luke's version of the question. There's been a lot of discussion around the game in terms of Link and his role in the story, specifically the fact that he was largely sidelined in the narrative compared to the other characters. Everyone else got to play a much more significant role and got a lot more character development thanks to the fact they were able to actually converse and interact instead of just silently reacting to things. Zelda in particular really shined from start to finish, while Link spent most of the game as just the guy who protects the princess. Have we reached a point where Link's silent pantomime has become a hindrance to the storytelling, and do you think this game and its reception will finally get Nintendo on board with Link speaking?
They could still explore Link's character without making him talk. Like,
Yeah.
I don't have a problem at all with him talking. I'm okay with it, but if they want to remain silent, they could still explore his character through several moments without him speaking. Like, it doesn't need to be like the most intense, deep story either. Just quick little drops here and there. Like, even Wind Waker, him having like his sister and his grandma was some character development, some reason for him to go out there.
Yeah.
It only takes something small like that.
I think the original Breath of the Wild actually went into it a little bit because Zelda had, in cutscenes, implied that Link would talk. And then there was, between, I think, Zelda's diary and Mipha's diary, they would go into how, like, at some point, Link basically became mute. Something happened, they don't know what, but he basically became mute then, but apparently he's a glutton. So that's where his personality shines. And we do see that in Age of Calamity, where they have multiple cutscenes where it's just for humor. He's just eating. He'll have the crazy rock roast. He'll have whatever he was eating in front of all the soldiers, and everyone's like cheering him on. Like, it's really silly, but those little things do something for the character. But I always feel like, even though in the world of Breath of the Wild they definitively don't let the player name him, he is Link. I think Link was always designed to be an attempt at a player self-insert, so they don't want to assign a strict personality to Link, because they want the player to think, well, how would they react in this situation? For the most part.
Sure. That scene was so funny, by the way, when he's eating the rock steaks. Because it came out of nowhere. I forgot what the chapter was, but it was a relatively serious chapter. I think it was the one where you're getting chased by the Guardian for the first time. And then you cut to that scene, and it's Mipha talking about how much she loves Link and hinting to it to Daruk, and then you look over, and then Link's just... eating this giant
shades of
Goku. So out of place.
It was like, yeah, that's like Goku. I was like,
it was funny, though. Yeah.
But
I do remember what chapter you're talking about. It was after you get the Master Sword,
right.
And Zelda's really feeling like down on herself, like, how is everyone doing better than me, but I can't do this? And Urbosa's like trying to cheer her up, and they look over at Link, and it's like Daruk and the soldiers like, yeah, go on, keep eating.
Yeah, right.
It's so funny.
And not to sideline the conversation, but I have to say, more so than probably top 5 Zelda moments of all time, honestly, for me, was playing that live on stream. You get to the Korok Forest, you get to the scene where he takes the Master Sword out, and the way the music swells, and you become this all-powerful monster, shooting Master Sword beams at everybody, taking out these hollows. The way they handled Link actually activating the Master Sword in this game was incredible. That was something I truly did not expect going into this. And, the interesting thing about the Breath of the Wild universe, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it that Link doesn't have the Triforce in this game, that Zelda has the entire thing, and that she activates the Sealing of Ganon? So this moment for Link where, he doesn't have the heart containers that are required in Breath of the Wild to pull the Master Sword out, but just having Aster there and having this change in the timeline where he finally removes it and then becomes all-powerful, that threw a wrench in things for me, and I certainly wasn't expecting it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was a really well done scene.
Yeah.
I'm actually, I kind of fell off the wagon there with some of like the follow-ups to the Breath of the Wild story, but I never, awakening her power, it's just like, I thought that was the power that got us, like the goddess Hylia's power being awakened with her.
Right.
I actually don't think they clarified definitively the Triforce's, what's up with the Triforce and
Involvement with it?
in Breath of the Wild. Yeah, like where it is, what's going on with it per se. I think it's intentionally left that way because I think maybe they might reveal something unless a book
like
revealed something that I just haven't read yet. Yeah. But that was one thing I was like very curious about. But back to Link, I do feel the best they've done with him was in the Wind Waker with facial expressions and emotion. Link felt like he had the most this character and kind of an emotional story in that game, and so I felt very attached to that Link. Whereas a lot of the other games, while they still try to do the facial expression stuff, it's mostly another side character that's driving any kind of emotional connection. Like Midna in Twilight Princess, it's Midna's story. You're really following her around. Yeah. And then in Skyward Sword, it's sort of Link. They try to do a bit, but it's also, again, it's like Zelda and Impa and, figuring out what's going on with like the world and stuff. And Link's kind of just like, I'm the bystander, like I'm the vessel that you get to experience all this in. Breath of the Wild, they think I don't know. I'm getting to the point after seeing Age of Calamity. Sorry, I keep doing Breath of the Wild, Age of Calamity. By the way, I keep saying it wrong because it's not.
Might as well just call it that. Honestly,
this is the third time I've done this in a recording. But anyway, in Hyrule Warriors, Age of Calamity, I do think if it's anytime's going to happen, now or sometime in the near future is a time to try this out. I would like to see it, because if it doesn't go well, then just don't do it again. Just say, okay, we tried it, it didn't go well. But I think they'd be surprised by the reaction to Link having a personality, especially if they get a good team of writers in there and actually come up with a very focused style and a direction with it. And I mean, they've proven time and time Nintendo can make really good characters that are very appealing and enduring. And I think, from to me personally, I feel like they owe it to themselves to try once, honestly.
Yeah. Well, what they could do, I was just thinking about this when you were talking about it, is, again, going back to that one trailer we have of the sequel, you see Link activating that thing that then awakens Ganondorf. What if, like, Ganondorf inserts his vessel inside of Link, and so Link speaks as Ganondorf throughout the course of the game as the villain, and you take over as Zelda. That's it. Yeah. And you play the game as Zelda, and you have to, exercise Ganondorf out of Link, and that'd be interesting. I'd be down for that. Let's do it. If she's got the whole Triforce, why not? Just go.
You need to read the Valiant comics, and I'm gonna maybe suggest the cartoon show as well, Roger, if you haven't already, because some of the crazy ideas. There is a whole thing where Link is getting possessed by the Triforce of Power and slowly transforms into Ganon, or Ganon-like figure in one of the Valiant comics. And
I'll check it out.
Dude, that should be a premise for a Zelda game someday. Link turns into Ganon or something great. You just talking about this like
around and says, Goofy, I can't wait to bomb some Dodongos.
Yeah. My next question is from John Mull, 18. They want to know, was a Musou-style game really the best choice for a story like this?
I definitely think so, personally, because I think if the war of the Calamity, with how big it was, if it was as sparsely spread about with enemies as Breath of the Wild was, wouldn't have really felt that threatening. And I think doing this kind of gameplay is the best way to work with large armies, because I think if you have any other kind of game with that amount of things going on, you run the risk of the game is just gonna, everyone complains about, or so many people complain about the frame rate issues with Age of Calamity. Imagine what that would be like if it wasn't a Musou game, where you have hundreds of things on screen and it's like a normal Zelda game. I don't think that would play well. Everyone, I think a bunch of people remember that one scene from Skyward Sword where you're rushing down to Girahim, and you have to go down the giant spiral in the sealed grounds, and there's like 100 bokoblins. That starts to run kind of slowly, and it takes a while to get through all of them because it's 100 bokoblins.
Sure. I'm trying to pull up, by the way, real quick, the name of the chapter that I'm thinking of. It's near the end of the game. It's one of the last side missions that you complete. It's one I still haven't been able to beat yet. But that mission alone sort of proves why this needed to be a Musou game, because you've got Malice Guardians running all over the place, far into the distance even. You've got Hinoxes and Lionels running around. You've got all the different outposts with all the different types of soldiers. Plus you've got Aster on one side, Harbinger Ganon on the other, and you have to take all of them down in like 8 minutes. I want to find the name of this mission.
Fort Hateno?
I think it's called the Siege of Fort Hateno.
Literally, that's it. Wow, amazing. Yeah. You knew that. I just looked. Yeah, it's the Siege of Fort. Wow. See, I didn't turn on my Switch. That's great.
I grinded that level a few times to reach level 100. So.
It's brutally difficult. It's a brutally difficult mission if you're not expecting it, and you've got everything thrown at you, and time management is you have to send 2 characters off this way, 2 characters the other way, but there's the Guardians that are attacking the fort as well, so you have to have a character stay behind. Wow, man. Brutal.
Damiani, I feel like the story was tailored around a Musou game. Like, you could tell the same kind of story of Hyrule Falling like it did in the original, because like in the original you don't see hundreds of bokoblins and moblins attacking. You see mostly the Guardians messing stuff up.
Right.
But I think it makes total sense. Like, if you're going to do a Musou game, like, yeah, you should go crazy with these forces that Ganon actually has. We don't get to see that a lot. Mm-hmm. And, like, to me, the story is kind of its own thing. It makes itself its own thing. It's its own timeline now. So I don't see the problem with it.
Yeah.
The only thing I could see them maybe trying, but it'd be a different style of game because it's also a series about big wars, is the Fire Emblem going the Fire Emblem direction, like a tactical type
Yeah.
game. I sent Roger off here.
Well, you know this, Damiani. See, this is when I get invited as a guest, ladies and gentlemen. Is I get invited on the Fire Emblem, and then I force my way into the Zelda ones because I want so badly for them to revisit Fire Emblem Warriors. Especially because this is developed by Koei Tecmo anyway, and they made 3 houses. Revisit 3 houses, make it like Fire Emblem Warriors, the unification of Fodlan, and give us the happy ending where all 3 of the lords finally solve their problems, come together, and take on one massive threat. That's what I genuinely want. And I understand that not a lot of people love Fire Emblem Warriors, and I understand that it doesn't have the mainstream appeal of something like a Zelda game. But I think Koei Tecmo literally helped make that game, and they're making this one. Give them back Fire Emblem, please. Give me Edelgard, give me Dimitri, Claude, everybody, Hubert, everyone.
I think you would get that because with this one, with Age of Calamity, they work so close to the Zelda team, but also as from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, the 3 Houses writing team wrote Age of Calamity.
Yes, exactly.
With the story, so
wow.
you could, Roger, get your dream after seeing this, and I think what was the West will see soon. Persona 5 Scramble, right? It was announced for It's been announced for Western.
I have no idea.
No, I don't think it has been. No, I don't think it has been.
Officially announced?
When's it coming? I don't know anything. I'm just saying, like,
It's out now in
I played the
Japan.
Japanese demo when it came out on Switch, and how authentic to Persona 5's world that felt. And then this, it's like, I think Koei Tecmo has a new style of Musou that they're going for, a subgenre of the mainline entries of Musou games, that they could revisit Fire Emblem and do a more focused Fire Emblem game, because they were kind of going that direction with it, but not quite. They didn't go, like, I don't think they fully committed to the degree they did with this.
Especially if you go back and you look at 3 Houses, right? The whole new thing they added is that your armies were with you for some of the major attacks. So it's like you already have the excuse to have these massive armies on the field. Why would you not do that? and 3 Houses also was like one of the most successful Fire Emblem games ever made, wasn't it? If not the most successful. So revisit it.
So should we just cut to the chase and say, like, this is all leading to the Super Smash Brothers Musou game, right? we want those big cutscene battles to happen. I want to play as them all. Just running around all your heroes.
They're gonna do something with Smash Brothers. I want them to do like a Kingdom Hearts type thing. Make it an RPG. Have the different characters in your environments in your party. That'd be fun. But I feel like if you do that with a Warriors game, they should either maybe revisit something like Fire Emblem or go in a completely different direction. Do like Dreamland Warriors or something with the Kirby characters. You know.
Yeah. But while I feel like this Musou game worked out very well because there's a large scale battle, again, like doing a more traditional Fire Emblem style game could have done this, but I think the working relationship with Koei Tecmo, they already, like, this was needed to get made probably in a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
I think it would have been taking a little bit more time, because it would have been, I worry it would have ended up a situation like Tokyo Mirage Sessions, where I know a lot of people love that game, but at the beginning of that announcement cycle, it ended up not being what I was hoping for.
Right.
You know, which is the more like traditional Fire Emblem SMT crossover, very tactical. It's like, okay, I see what they're going for here. So there's potential for them to drop the ball here. Where this, I think they nailed it, and I think I would trust this type of game more now than anything else for sure.
Yeah.
I have a question from Anthony about what was the big moment you didn't expect but really should have that happened in this game. For example, I didn't expect the Blood Moon in the penultimate mission, but it's such a major part of Breath of the Wild that I feel I should have.
I gotta think about it. I feel like probably the future champions being introduced.
Yeah, that was mine.
Yeah, I feel like that makes total sense. Like, of course they would have shown up if there's a time travel thing, but the way it happened was just a huge surprise to me. When you see the 2 of them trapped in the Divine Beast and you get the portal, and then the future champions swoop in. Literally, if you're playing as Rivali and Teba, they swoop in and save the day. I loved it. I thought the whole way it was pulled off was great. I liked seeing those characters interact with their ancestors. It was just a lot of fun.
I think, just to not use the same one that everyone else has, because while that was a really big one, I think one that might be undervalued by a lot of people is the scene when Zelda gets to reunite with her father. The fact that you actually had this whole fight on the Great Plateau, which theoretically, in the original Breath of the Wild, is where the king made his last stand.
Yep.
And where he dies. But in this version, it's where everything comes back together and Zelda gets, like, the true hope of, we really can do this, can't we? Like,
Yeah.
she'd been working up to that, especially once she got her power back. But now that she, like, actually has her father back, and he believes in her now more than before, I think that was such a touching moment. And I genuinely expected that battle to end and they find that he died. Like, I actually didn't think that he was going to be there. I thought going to the Great Plateau, knowing that that's where his grave is in Breath of the Wild, like, oh, she's going to find he made it out of the castle and this is it. I'm like, oh, I'm not ready for that. But I was shocked that he was there. He's really fun to play as too. But
oh my gosh!
It went really. It was such an emotional scene there. It was really nice. The Yiga clan were crying.
Yeah, on the surface, that was a really good moment. I didn't expect that either, but really not surprised in the end. But when you get to play as King Rome, the guy's form where he goes into like the breath, I was like, I should have seen that coming. I was like, of course. I mean, I'm sorry, this is the reverse of the question though. Because I don't think I should have ever expected this, and I still want to see. I mean, I haven't seen like this. I guess there's a final cutscene or something. Maybe I just haven't seen yet. Whatever, you did spoil what's in it, but the moment in the game where you get when you're Zelda's starting to piece together Terraco and like where'd it come from and who built it and everything, and you get the blurry image of Zelda's mom and you do not get to see her.
Right.
I was like. I was like so expecting, but that build up, I'm like, we're gonna see her mom. I was like, oh my gosh, we're gonna see Zelda's mom. I was like, yes, and then like, no. I was like, that's all. I was like, no, why? Oh no, I need DLC immediately, please. That build up, I was just like totally expecting it to happen, and it didn't. I was like, no. But yeah, that just added more to the Terraco thing. I was like, oh my gosh, this is I like you've set the bar higher for the sequel. The sequels they cannot settle for memories again. They have to do a better story in the sequel. But yeah,
I'm sure they will too. I'm sure that's like the number one complaint most people had. Even people who were like, "This is a masterpiece," said that it could have used a little bit more story. They could have fleshed out a couple things, have actual dungeons. So I feel like the opportunity is there. And I think they're setting up a lot of stuff in this game. Like I said, they could, do what Brad was talking about and like only bits and pieces throw things in, or they could just go full force and go, yeah, this is fully canon. This is another part of the timeline, and let's just throw in a bunch of stuff that was in this and further explain some of the things that you saw for the first time in Age of Calamity. Yeah.
Yeah. Yarden has an interesting question, and more people than Yarden postulated this question to us. Do you think more Musou fans became Zelda fans, or any more Zelda fans became Musou fans because of the two Hyrule Warriors games? Sorry, just asking because I know Zelda fans that would never have touched a Musou game otherwise, and I know Musou fans that just play every Musou game they can get their hands on, and have gone on to play and love new franchises that way. Thanks.
I think Zelda's such a massive franchise that I imagine it's probably more Zelda fans got into Musou. But I don't know. I would love like a study on that.
I definitely think that is the case both ways. I know somebody who was never that big on Zelda games. And after playing Age of Calamity, their first Zelda game is like proper Zelda game, quote unquote, is going to be Breath of the Wild. So. Whew. And it's one of those things they just never really played too much of the series growing up. They know about it but never really played it. And likewise, if I never played the original Hyrule Warriors, I never would have been interested in Fire Emblem Warriors or Persona 5 Scramble, whenever we get that. Like, I never would have been interested in these things, but they've really captured my interest. And I think that's because of how well the original Hyrule Warriors is done, but Age of Calamity did such a good job making that feel fresh and not like a coat of paint thrown on a Warriors game, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
and it's a proper like hybrid of the series that it makes me excited for what future games they can make of this kind. And Persona 5 Scramble is another example like that, where it really kind of hybrids the source material.
Yeah, I'd say it's closer to the source material now, which I think has really helped. Like, Hyrule Warriors compared to Age of Calamity, it's so much closer to Breath of the Wild than Hyrule Warriors, and I think that's helped a lot. Like, for me personally, that's gotten me more interested in it. Like, I've played a lot of Musou games, but they don't really appeal to me too much, but as they're getting closer to the source material, like Persona and stuff like that, I get more interested in it.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned Code Paint, because I went back and recently rewatched my Game Trailers Hyrule Warriors review back for Wii U, and I said it's like I used the exact same line. It's like, yeah, it's a Musou game with a Zelda coat of paint. And I was like, oh yeah, but I mean, it's the right point, because the original game does not, Hyrule Warriors for Wii U and all their the DS and the Definitive Edition for Switch, it doesn't have the same feeling as Age of Calamity. Is the point we've been all, I think, trying to make here. And I do think the original one would not have turned, like, Zelda fans probably did not become Musou fans because of that one. They probably were like, it was neat, fun to play for a while, but ultimately probably bailed from it. Whereas this one, I think, the only thing I can think of, I don't wouldn't do such a broad strokes with Zelda fans. I think Breath of the Wild fans probably were more inclined to jump into this, because there are definitely some fans of the Zelda series out there who still didn't. Breath of the Wild didn't gel as well with them as a lot of people, the various issues and stuff. So, well, I would put it that way. I know we already talked about possibilities for how things will play out from this game and in the sequel. So I'm going to give you one last chance here, because Alexander and a few other patrons asked about, how do you feel this game's plot will impact Breath of the Wild 2? Do you think there'll be any tie-ins to Age of Calamity, or will they just ignore it? So if there's anything we didn't talk about in that regard yet that you had an idea about or think will definitely not be referenced.
I do think we might see, instead of the use of the Sheikah Slate, if the future champions do remember things, we might see some sort of comeback of Terraco to the degree of allowing all of them to use the Sheikah runes. So specifically, instead of Link or Zelda or whoever's playable in Breath of the Wild 2, instead of them needing to take out the Sheikah Slate every time and use a specific app, each of them have the ability to use them. And especially if they end up doing like multiple playable characters or something. Because I believe Age of Calamity explains that as it's like powered by Terraco or something, or it's because of Terraco that they're able to do that.
Yeah.
But Terraco, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't exist in that timeline anymore, right? Because
Not
Terraco's
anymore.
now living in the past, chilling.
Because
dies,
the
and then,
Terraco
of course,
from
you
that
can rebuild
timeline
him.
is the one that went back.
Right.
But
Right,
if the
right,
future
right.
champions remember things,
Sure.
they could remind Zelda about it. Because
That's
technically
true.
this Zelda would not remember him at all.
Yeah,
But-
yeah,
It's a stretch.
Yeah.
I'm not sure they'll do it, but
yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting idea. I don't think there's going to be much Damiani. Just a few things. Like, the Sheikah Slate, I don't think Link's going to even use the Sheikah Slate in the next one. I think Zelda will use that if she's playable. Because,
Sure.
his arm thing, I think that's going to be the new
right.
Absolutely.
kind of thing for him. I could see, a few loose plot things, Astra, maybe some more background information on him. Maybe not even a cutscene or anything, just a text thing you read somewhere, something talking about him more and that kind of things. But we said earlier, the Zelda team kind of likes to have the freedom to do whatever they want, and I feel like if it makes sense for them and if they want to implement, they can. But I have a feeling they're just kind of gonna want to do whatever they want, and maybe if it's convenient, they'll put it in.
Yeah, and I feel very much the same way. I think if anything has a really good shot of being integral to the plot, I think it will be Aster, because it'll be more of an explanation of how Ganon or the corpse ended up down there in the first place. But I still feel like if the champions are present within the story, that this is probably going to be referenced. There's going to be something where it's we went to the past and beat Ganon, even if it's in a side quest or something, even if it's not a main quest of the story. I feel like this game, because of its success, is almost too big to then not reference again. So again, I don't think that would play a major role in the story, but I do think that Aster, at the very least, will. And, if we don't end up getting DLC in this game for Aster explaining what that mysterious village that he comes from is, maybe that we visit that village, and that's the key to understanding some greater thing about Breath of the Wild 2.
Yeah.
if they reference the Champions reference beating Ganon before, I think that'd be really great if Ganon, they're very confident because they've beaten him before like 2 times, but if this time he just like overwhelms them,
Right.
I think that'd be a really great way to implement that.
Causes a second Calamity. There you go. And then they need to make Age of
Yeah.
Calamity 2 to save the future champions from being killed by Ganon. It's all a vicious cycle. They have infinite games. Nintendo can make money forever. They're fine.
Yeah. Taiko always has these
it.
consequences that come back to bite you for sure.
That's it. Yeah, she builds Terraco 2.0. That's the whole thing.
Oh yeah, it's like a giant mech.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Oh shit!
There you go. In the future, yeah.
I'm down for it. Yeah.
It's Monolith Soft. Yeah, they're doing you're the full Xenoblade influence now. Coming on. in.
Here we go.
Oh, man.
Comes full circle.
Yep.
That's true. Yeah, because Monolith Soft is doing mass hirings for Breath of the Wild 2, so there you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm here for it. Whatever. More Xenoblade, Zelda, Fire Emblem, whatever. I'm good.
The only other thing I can think of maybe is just like geography, because this supposedly taking place in it's taking place in the same Hyrule. I just don't know the extent of if it's confined to the same Hyrule. Are we going underground? Will we go beyond Hyrule, like to different areas, like beyond the ravine we couldn't cross? Because in Age of Calamity, they did expand upon they expanded upon existing locations. The Yiga Clan hideout,
Yeah.
we saw parts of it that were not present in Breath of the Wild, and also we got to see things pre-Calamity. So maybe we could see how when they're rebuilt, how they will look. They'll go off the Age of Calamity template for the rebuilt areas again, which would be a nice touch. Though they could go in a completely different direction. So I can see like that superficial level stuff being an influence to it. I don't know if they're really gonna make. I think at best they'll give you like a nod to something that happened, like a lot of you were saying. I just don't think they'll make anything essential from Age of Calamity to be able to play Breath of the Wild sequel. I think it's mostly gonna be you needed to maybe played the first game and that's it.
Right.
Yeah, well, I think I think all the stuff that was built upon in Age of Calamity is built upon things that were already introduced in Breath of the Wild. Like, if they mention a fortune teller, they could just call him Aster now. Like, they don't have to say fortune teller. Like, if they reference the fortune teller in the original Breath of the Wild. Yeah, and like I said, if anything else, they could just do it as a side quest or something like that to... they could do DLC for Breath of the Wild 2 even, and have the side quest line be expanding upon what happened in Age of Calamity. There's a lot of potential there. Yeah.
Maybe be a DLC with if you have a save file for Age Calamity on your Switch, then it'll trigger certain side quests opening up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Ooh, I like that.
You know what I like?
I
Not
like
to
stuff like
change
that.
the subject, but I want to bring this up because I don't know when else I'll have a time to bring this up within this discussion. And I felt it very strongly, Tris, when you had mentioned the King and how fun the King is to play. It blows my mind that there is not, especially after this, and Nintendo knew that they were coming out with this game, that there is not another Zelda character in Smash Brothers. And I know I don't want to devolve into a whole Smash Brothers conversation, but the fact that literally we've had the same 6 characters from Zelda, the 3 Links, Zelda, Sheik, and Ganondorf, since Brawl, and we have had no Impa, despite the redesign in the original Hyrule Warriors. The King, I mean, there are so many really cool opportunities, especially with this game, with the moveset that Impa has, absorbing the symbols and then creating like shadow clones, or, even going into the stuff with the King, being a stance change character, having the giant royal broadsword and then switching to the old man. Like, I think Impa and the King in particular would be incredible to add to the game, to Smash Brothers, as playable characters, because the whole thing that Sakurai's been saying in the past is that Skull Kid and Midna and all these other one-offs, right? The reason why they're not playable is pretty much because they're only relevant in one game. But the King and Impa are through lines throughout the entire series, and now have bases to build upon to turn into playable characters, and could still reference other games in the series. Like, I imagine if the King Roam, the way he plays in this game, was put in Smash Bros, you could do his final smash being the King of Red Lions or something and flooding the stage. You could have, or even like one of its taunts could be referencing the old man from the first Zelda game, like, it's dangerous to go alone, take this, where he puts on the old man garb. Like, any of that kind of stuff would be amazing. And I think it's ripe for fan service, and it's just wild to me. And another reason I bring this up is because we're recording this right before the Game Awards, right? And it's highly likely we see something either related to Smash Brothers or related to Zelda, Breath of the Wild 2, at the Game Awards. We could see one of those two things. Why not take this opportunity, Sakurai can go, hey, I'm going to do a pump fake. Let's make it appear like it's a Breath of the Wild 2 trailer. Boom. Impa. Boom. King Roll.
my gosh.
Playable characters. They tie in, because, they love their free advertisements. They put Byleth in there for Fire Emblem Three Houses. Throw that in there. Sell some more copies of Age of Calamity. Bada bing. Bada boom. Mic drop. That's it.
Roger, you're getting my hopes up too much for this. I've been wanting a Zelda character for so long.
Especially because, Tris, like you were talking about with the Source Gaming stuff, it came to mind. I'm like, we have to talk about it. At least a little bit. We have to.
Man, not only that, you gave my hopes too much up for the Game Awards as well. Like I just don't, with how Nintendo's been lately, I don't know if they're really gonna have anything big at the Game Awards. Like they just do their own thing now, but you never know.
Yeah.
But that's a really good idea. Totally plausible, and in fact, the bait and switch thing is
would be really cool.
Sakurai's alley, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Whew, yeah. I have a question from Ajax. By the way, when we get done with these last two questions, I will give you an opportunity. If there's something we haven't talked about, we can totally dive into those topics as well. But if you
I've
feel
said
the
my
burning
piece
need,
on Smash. I'm fine.
yeah, we'll switch it at any time. Yeah, Smash Brothers. Don't worry. This comes from Ajax. I was very impressed with the music and cutscenes in this game. Do you think it's a sign of more to come in Breath of the Wild 2?
Yes. I think they're going to step their game up big time on that stuff.
Well, let me be more specific with the music part of it. You know how Breath of the Wild handled its music delivery and went for a more minimalistic approach. Do you think they're going to maintain that style? Or do you think they're going to maybe go in the other direction where, the music's kind of just always kind of present and kicks up, like themes. Each area has a theme and stuff like that.
Inherently, if Breath of the Wild 2 is focusing more on story, we're going to get more cutscenes, right? If we have dungeons, entryways to dungeons, bosses in those dungeons, places to build out the story, you're naturally going to have more music introduced into the game, right? I mean, there's going to be more opportunities to have these really dramatic moments. And something that, Age of Calamity definitely excels at is like Aster's theme is so good. All the different battle themes on the field where you're, taking down the Malice Guardians. I mean, there are so many really amazing opportunities to throw in that epic music that I don't necessarily think they're going to throw that into the main field when you're playing through Breath of the Wild 2. But I think this type of stuff could be introduced in like dungeon areas or, giant epic cutscenes as well.
Yeah, when it comes to the music of specifically Breath of the Wild, I think a lot of that was done to really sell the idea of this kind of not really abandoned, but destroyed kingdom of Hyrule.
Right.
It really set the ambient of you're walking through this really depressing land, and the only time the music really picked up otherwise is when you weren't in those, when you were fighting larger enemies or tied to interactions with specific characters or bosses, because boss music always has to be exciting.
Right.
But when it comes to Breath of the Wild 2, you're now in some sort of state of rebuilding Hyrule. So I think if the music is any sort of similar to the original Breath of the Wild, I think it would at the very least sound more hopeful. It would have more of a positive sound to it when you're not dealing with whatever threat Ganondorf is in this case. But I do think we'll see it go more to the traditional music sense that we see with Age of Calamity, where they really showed what they can do with the music of this world, and I think they'll definitely do a lot with that. I guess to touch on the cutscene bit, my issue with Breath of the Wild actually was always how some of its cutscenes felt very short. Like some of them, like for example, take the cutscene to introduce Sidon, where all he does is a flip off of a tower and lands in front of you. Yeah, that's cool, but that's a 15-second cutscene that doesn't really do too much. Whereas Age of Calamity, there's so much emotion and expressions put into these. Like, take when Terraco blows himself up for the final battle, and the little screw lands next to Zelda's hand, and the little subtle movements of her hand as she goes to pick that up. There's so much emotion in that, and that's not even like a part of her face. That's her hand.
Yeah.
And I think that says a lot about what they can do with these kinds of cutscenes. That on a main, not that this wasn't a main canon Zelda, but on a main canon Zelda fully handled by the Zelda team, not even mostly Koei Tecmo, I think they could do a lot with it, and I hope it at least matches this quality.
Yeah, you make such a good point, because I'm glad someone finally showed the potential of putting a lot of effort into not just cutscene direction, but the storytelling in a Zelda game that in a more traditional sense, that cutscenes can work, that you can convey emotion, and players love it. Now, the kind of devil's advocate here, and this is like what I want to maybe to redirect this question back to everyone here, is that while Age of Calamity did demonstrate great cutscenes, it's a whole different matter when you're playing a traditional style Zelda game versus a Musou game. Musou games have missions. You go to an area. Even though it's not, you can pick where you want to go at some points. It's not a giant open world, or you need to, the developers need to account for where you might be at any time, which is why I think we got the original type of storytelling that they did, because there were so many other, in my opinion, there were so many other things they needed to figure out and get right. That story wasn't the most important on the list. However, it's the sequel. They should have this stuff figured out. Hopefully, it's time to elevate that storytelling. So my question is, can they maintain that level of quality that we saw in Age of Calamity in a type of game like Breath of the Wild sequel, in an open world style game? Or do you think maybe there's going to be they'll have to do something different? And my reference I'd give you is like examples like Ghost of Tsushima, because I know you played a lot of that too, Brad. Like, I really like how they handled your narrative direction in that game, based on how they handled like side quest and learning more about individual characters that way. Would you want to see something more like that? Do you think they could do something like that?
Like their own like quest line kind of thing like that?
Do you think they'll do something like that, or do you
a little
feel
story?
like more traditional is better?
I think they will, because I'm sure they're going to stick to the nature of you can kind of go where you want, do what you want. It might be a little more directed, I would say, this time around, especially the story front. I don't think they want you going like 10 hours without seeing a cutscene again and just seeing this cutscene being like, oh yeah, what's going on kind of thing like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think there'll be areas that are connected with a certain story or a certain character, and you get to do that whole thing, then you'll go on to the next thing. And there'll be like main plot threads as you progress through the main campaign.
Very, very, very beginning of Breath of the Wild 2, you could find the baton of winds or whatever. And then every once in a while, when there's a main quest, you see the wind going in Breath of the Wild. And you go, I'll go follow the wind and maybe see where it's going to take me. I mean, they could literally take that straight out of Tsushima. So, yeah. On the topic of cutscenes, though, and depending on where you are, the one thing I kind of found fascinating playing the first one is that so many of the shrines are sort of their one-off little areas, and they don't really have any tie to the greater story. I think they could do a lot of really cool cutscenes in just like one-off shrines that you discover at any point in the story, introducing like some massive boss character or unveiling some truth about Hyrule, where it's not really going to matter if you're 1 hour in or 100 hours in. You're still going to get the same experience with that cutscene. The only difference is the way you look. I feel like they could still do that and have that discoverability aspect of it without actually having to say, okay, we're going to have cutscenes at this exact moment 5 hours into the game, you know?
Yeah. Damiani, I talked to you about this before, but they could have used the character Breath of the Wild like Girahim, kind of like this villain who would appear throughout your time going through this world, kind of being placed in certain areas to keep you on track of your quest and to make sure you know what you're doing, to do some sort of sense of urgency.
Sure.
Like, you kind of had that in Breath of the Wild, but at the same time, it was kind of just like, you know, just do your own thing. You can come back here when you want, kind of thing like that. But something a little more daunting.
Look at what happened with Age of Calamity now, too. I mean, they've introduced a character like that. If they want to bring back a revived Malice Aster, I mean, they could do it.
Yeah.
Again, there's no... you don't need to play Age of Calamity to know who that is. They could literally just reference the fortune teller from the first game, and then the other champions, if they want to throw this in as a side thing, could go, oh yeah, that's Aster. We met him in the past, and that's it. They don't explain anything else. They don't need to.
And I almost think
he doesn't even need to be. I'll say theoretically, he doesn't even need to be Malice Aster. We don't know, because he didn't have Harbinger Ganon with him.
That's
we don't
true.
actually know how powerful he got. For all we know, he could have just used dark magic to just like seal himself away when he saw Calamity Ganon got sealed, set to, you know, the alarm clock wakes him up when Calamity Ganon wakes up, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And maybe then he's the same Aster, but he didn't go through Age of Calamity because he didn't have Harbinger Ganon. So
yeah, that would be interesting.
Possible.
Yeah, that's I was thinking something like that too. That's like a perfect solution they can do with that. I think they also have a template for how they could do something to handle kind of the funneling effect of like how do we know when a person's going to be here? Like how do we path this so we know when to trigger cutscenes? I think they just need to look at Majora's Mask. While it's linear, yes, you go to each thing, but look how they handle each zone. Each zone has a story, and there's like an introduction. There's like basically it's like 3 acts basically, I think, in each of those zones. When you just cross a threshold, like at any point, maybe an NPC runs into you. It starts a cutscene. It's like, hey, and it'd be great. We have all these characters now. and it's now Hyrule's in a rebuilding phase. It would be so easy to just take like a champion again. It's like, oh, you walked over to into this area, you meet this person, and now it's like you can now follow the storyline in this area if you so choose to, or you can just go over. Like you don't have to do that, but there's incentive now. You get to learn more about this area, and as you progress through that quest line, you're rewarded with more cutscenes. I think they just need to do something like that where. Under the hood, it is a zoned off game. Like each area has like zones and boundaries that they know you're going to cross, and then they just have those quest lines ready to go once you cross over to them. And I think they just need to do, like that's why reference goes to Tsushima, because I think they did a really good job of like you can just piece out on that quest line at any time, and you feel like you've gotten some good development. But now I can return back to the main quest line or go to a whole different area if I want. And just a good way to keep track of that without becoming too overbearing, I think, because a lot of these open world games love to put the dots everywhere. It's like, that's not what I want. I don't want something like that where it becomes an activity fest like Ubisoft style. It's like, no, not that direction.
Yeah, and there's a precedent for what you're talking about too in Breath of the Wild with the Terrytown side quest, because there's cutscenes that happen throughout the course of that, and there is a story to be told in that area, but you could really do it at any time once you discovered it and once you've met the characters essential for that quest line.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Is there anything else we haven't talked about that you really want to get off your chest about Age of Calamity, Breath of the Wild sequel, like in terms of continuity and something like that, or just in general about Zelda storytelling that this brought up? And I give you an opportunity here because that's all the questions I pulled for this. I have one last thing I will say, but I wanted to give all three of you the opportunity first.
I brought up Smash already. I'm good. So.
Smash? Want to bring up Pikmin? Pikmin Warriors?
Pikmin would actually work really well. So the problem with Pikmin though is that Pikmin they're trying to figure out what to do with that franchise, right? I mean, we just had that conversation a couple weeks ago. Talking about Pikmin 3 Deluxe, where we don't really know the future of that series or what Nintendo wants to do with it. I don't think Pikmin Warriors would have the same success as Hyrule Warriors would when they've really only had 3 mainline games, and they're still trying to make the mainline series popular. So I think you need a popular series first to build upon with a base. I mean, I could maybe see them venturing off and doing like a Xenoblade Warriors at some point, but even then I feel like that's still a little bit too niche. I feel like Fire Emblem has now elevated to the point where, especially because of its involvement with Smash Brothers, where now it's sort of like maybe not AAA on the level of, Mario, Zelda, Splatoon, Animal Crossing, Pokemon, but I think it's like the next tier. I think it's like Metroid tier now, where they can sort of experiment a little bit more, whereas I think Xenoblade is still sort of not at that level yet. It's getting closer, for sure, but it's still not quite there.
Man, now I want Animal Crossing Warriors. That sounds fun.
Animal Crossing Warriors.
I'd be down for that.
Yeah, that sounds
Invade
cool.
other people's towns, that'd be great.
Warriors, yeah. I don't think the Pokemon Company allow it, but Pokemon Warriors.
Mm-hmm. Dude, I still want Pokemon Monster Hunter. I know it'll never happen, but I think Pokemon Monster Hunter would be...
That would be great, too.
Monster Hunter would be godlike.
Carving up?
Carving up Charizards and stuff? Oh, my God.
I mean, to break
So
up Charizard.
cool.
I just want to see the Pokemon team reaction to a pitch video of chopping up Charizard. Just their facial oh no.
Well, the way they could get around it is they could use fossil Pokemon, where they revert back to their fossil form. They could totally get around with it and say, these Pokemon were already dead, so you're literally just crafting things from their fossils, and you'd have Aerodactyl, oh my God, I want it now. I want it.
We'll see. I mean, I once got an opportunity to ask Blizzard about Pokemon MMO, and I got to see their reaction to that. And
we got to get through the Pokemon MOBA first, right? We got Pokemon Unite. We still know nothing about it. Let's see how that goes. Slow your roll.
We're jumping too far ahead in the timeline here.
Right. We need Terraco to reel us back in.
For sure.
Well, I think on that then, because to mention things that we wanted to bring up, I do think that a lot of people tend to have an initially negative look at Age of Calamity, really because of how it was marketed, not quite matching up with what it actually is. And I know a bunch of people are upset at everything kind of being because of Terraco, and how is this one little guardian so good at this? But I think what a lot of people fail to realize that we kind of touched upon earlier, but we touched upon it earlier when we mentioned if Zelda has the whole Triforce or not. I think what it actually is, I think Terraco is actually an embodiment of the Triforce to a degree. When Zelda basically had everyone die and tried to seal Ganondorf, or tried to seal Calamity Ganon, her wish when using the Triforce was to protect everyone. That's when Terraco activated and went back in the past. It wasn't any other point until she made that wish.
It's true.
And upon making that wish, the Triforce takes it as, well, I can't save people already dead. So let me go back and try saving them. Which, of course, makes a different timeline. But the only other time his time traveling activates, once again, is... Well, actually, there's two other times. There's a time when they escape from Hyrule Castle and see that they've basically failed, and Zelda's trying to figure out what to do.
Right.
And what does it do? It creates another kind of way to fulfill that wish. Well, we're failing right now. How can I still help protect everybody? Let me bring in more people. And then at the end, when their power is not working against Calamity Ganon, and she once again wishes to protect everyone, it's not said, I wish, it's I must, but basically in the same way as a wish, he repairs himself enough to run up and detonate for it.
Yeah.
And I think, because I don't think Zelda as a, 6-7-year-old was enough of a genius to create a guardian that can time travel when Purah can't even do that.
Yeah, sure.
I think, and sure, maybe her mother helped make it. But I have a feeling a lot of Terraco's innate abilities are because it was reactivated and powered by the Triforce. Because that's something that we've seen that falls in line with what the Triforce is able to do in Zelda series, where it's the gods answering a wish and doing the best they can to help. Putting all of that into Terraco in a way that doesn't become too much of a divine intervention, I think is probably the best way to go about that. That's explainable in Zelda. But
that's a really good take on it, too.
That's also my theory on it. I haven't heard other people really spread that around, so I wanted to make sure to say it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
it sounds perfectly plausible. Yeah, absolutely.
And her power, and like as the power of the inheritor of the goddess Hylia's power, it's goddess of time. So it's like the Triforce is going to amplify that wish based on the person's latent abilities. There you go. Time travel, like that's what that power is. So that's a pretty good theory, actually.
It is.
That's a really nice theory you put together there. Because you're right. Because I always just assume Zelda's mother was like either a genius or had like some special divine powers, and that's where, and maybe, like her parents or someone who are also geniuses were aiding in that or something, and maybe I went in a different direction, like it's a top secret project or it's a gift for her, and my daughter will understand someday what it's meant for, its true power. And like even when the king looked at that what was the medallion called again from Zelda's mother, or that ultimately protected him.
Sure.
My thing was like there was something more going on here that hasn't completely been explained yet. And you never know, it being triggered by like a Triforce wish, who knows what it really did, how far it had to go back to impact things. Man, now you open up a can of worms about did it go back and affect anything else on top of that we don't know about yet. I like this stuff. That's really good.
I like that.
With regards to time travel, the one thing I wanted to say, it's not specific to this game, but it comes up a lot when time travel happens. And I don't know if I come off as too negative about them jumping right into a time travel storyline so soon in Breath of the Wild. I always viewed Breath of the Wild, for me personally, as a chance for them to break free of the previous history and lore. Give it a nod, give it some lip service, but we are not beholden to it anymore. It was just such a problematic thing that it took a what-if Link died scenario to make it work out, and that was our final answer for it. I was like, okay, sure, if that's how you want to make it work, that's fine. But let's get away from that nonsense. All that stuff, the reason I think I'm a little bummed out is because more often than not, time travel in Zelda is very shallow. I don't think it is very meaningful, and it leads to more problems, and it feels like it just feels so not satisfactory. Exception has always been for me, will always be Ocarina of Time because of the emotional impact and emotional ties to that. that they were trying to do something good, but they didn't foresee the consequence of what they were doing. Link gets trapped for 7 years, and that's his restriction. He can only travel between these two time periods, and it's because of, like, he had to become the hero of time. It's part of the character arc. It's part of the story arc, and it's introduced very early in a meaningful way. And I always view that as, like, the best way of doing time travel. And in some reality, that was all closed off. If they didn't want to go with multiple timeline nonsense at the time, it could have been a closed, like, we're done. We closed the loop. It's over.
Sure.
This is, you're going back. None of this is going to exist anymore. It's isolated. So it was kind of a beautiful, poetic ending in that you're going back and getting a second chance because you were a child, Link, and you skipped your childhood. So, like, all this I'm talking about, like, there was just so much more thought put into it. Whereas even, like, Skyward Sword, it's like, the bad guys lost. Well, we're going back and we're going to undo it anyway. You got to come back. I was like, wait, what? Well, why?
See, that goes back to, though, I feel like the onset of people theorizing about the timeline. Because I think even Miyamoto said this. Like, that's not something they were thinking about, like, connecting all the Zelda games before. It took, like, people theorizing after Ocarina of Time and, like you were talking about, closing the loop, him going back as a kid, for people to finally be like, oh, we got to connect all these games together. Like, there were little hints and teases to how these games connected, but I don't really think that was something they were thinking about. And now, especially now, with the onset of the internet and YouTubers and theories and all this stuff, I think that's something they are actively thinking about. And that's why the Hyrule Historia came out and they're like, all right, look, let's just lay this out so we have a game plan for the future to know where to build upon. And so I think that's why they're more open to it now. I think even before, if you look back at, like, Ocarina of Time, I don't even think if you look at the Hyrule Historia one, where it splits into 3 with Ocarina of Time, that was even something they were thinking about. I think there was the one that already happened, and then there was the one where you went back as a kid. It wasn't all of these different splits, you know.
Yeah, and the what I'm trying to wrap this up to the point I'm trying to make here on top of that is that with Breath of the Wild, it is a game I really loved, but I as I said, I've kind of, like, stepped away from going too deep into, like, theorizing about Zelda stuff. I had my fill prior to all of this. Like, Hyrule Story is, like, the culmination of that, and then, like, I don't want to go on that ride again. But there are so many content creators and fans out there who've taken up the mantle. Like, I just always every so often watch, like, a Zeltic video, and, like, they point out how much lore is yet to be explored just within the world of Hyrule, of Breath of the Wild. Like, these regions that have these relics, these ancient, ruins that was their previous civilization here. Like, there's so much that could be told within this game's own rules that I don't feel they need to have, like, we don't need to go on these crazy tangents just yet. I understand why they did it with Age of Calamity, but my truest wish is that Breath of the Wild just, like, here's, as we said, there's some nods or whatever, some acknowledgement maybe, but we're continuing with this world building we started in Breath of the Wild. They did so much work there. I don't want them to toss that away. And
I don't think they're necessarily going to, though. I mean, I think these two things could exist in the same world, right? In which we maybe never revisit the world of Age of Calamity. This was a one-off. We saw that. There is a branch on the timeline if you want to, path everything out. But realistically, like, maybe we just never go back. That's their happily ever after, right? Terraco saved everybody. We're good. That exists there. And we continue on from where we left off with Breath of the Wild, just with the knowledge of this side game now, where, maybe the Terraco stuff, the wishes with the Triforce being the embodiment of the Triforce, whatever, all that could come into play without really having to explore further in the timeline that Age of Calamity existed. Because even if you look back at, like, the original Breath of the Wild, and you look at the characters that are present here, right? Like, Wind Waker, the way it was explained is that the Rito were descendants of Zora, right? Because they got wings.
Zora evolved into the Rito.
Now the Zora and the Rito, they're in the same world. That we have the Koroks that exist in Korok Forest, or in the background of Triss's camera, right? where they look like they're Wind Waker inhabitants, but we've got a Great Deku Tree that looks more in line with Ocarina of Time, right? It's almost like, after years and years and years, eventually each of those 3 split timelines with Twilight Princess, Wind Waker, the classic games, eventually they all sort of meet at a point and they converge. And that's what Breath of the Wild is in the far, far future, where we're not dealing with any of that anymore, right? The wibbly wobbly time stuff. And then we go on from there with the Breath of the Wild sequel and have this little branching path with Age of Calamity if they choose to make more spin-off games. But again, it's not inherently important to the story of that original game and whatever story the sequel is going to tell.
Yeah. Remember, they were supposed to have Minish.
That's
right.
Oh, really?
That's right.
Yeah. I was thinking about who could have built Terraco. I was like, oh, Minish me? No,
There you go.
Think of any else. It was like they built gifts and left them around Hyrule. They were gonna do it.
Well, I did think it was interesting the way that, because you even mentioned this earlier, Tris, with the gallery thing, talking about, who exactly is Aster. It did seem real weird the way they put out that first trailer with Aster in it, because you're like, wait, is this Vati? Is that who this is? Because they're like, this secret villain, and you're like, they kind of look like Girahim a little bit. They kind of look like Vati. Like, who is this person? Maybe you're right. Maybe Aster's a Minish or something, and then he's just regular size because of dark magic. I don't know. That'd be cool.
Yeah, I feel like they just crafted something that really spoke to me and works well with a lot of people. Breath of the Wild's lore, and I guess I obviously, as you said, Roger, they can have there's not, it doesn't have to be either or. They can make things work. My fear is that they don't view Age of Calamity as something to build upon in terms of like narrative, like how we handle narrative in future Zelda games, or we just do what we want because really opening Pandora's box with this, not to compare it to another series where I don't think they necessarily understand what works well in the mainline stuff, but the spin-off stuff seems to do so well. Star Wars, Mandalorian, I feel like Age of Calamity got it, and it's but Breath of the Wild did too. It's like, please see how you can tell interesting stories that don't need to rely on the core story lore. I'm talking about like the Triforce. I mean, we're probably getting Ganon, we're probably getting Triforce, but like, you don't need those things. And in fact, they have their own games that have proven this. Some of the more interesting Zelda games have always been the ones that ditch that stuff. The Link's Awakening, obviously, Majora's Mask.
Link's crossbow training, of course, yeah.
The Link's crossbow. I'll take Link's crossbow training at this point. The Oracle games, when you don't do the connected ending crap, but sans that on their own, that type. Zelda can exist and under any story circumstances. I just basically, after, I don't want them to go back to the well of Triforce, Ganon, Calamity Ganon. It's like, don't stay in this cycle forever. Move on and do, because Age of Calamity showed more characters. I fully expect, like, when I was talking about that idea about going to different, like, the regions or whatever, I'm thinking of the Wind Waker companion dungeon stuff, where you have a companion with you now, because they've shown Zelda might be with you, some of it. Maybe you get separated. Maybe, like, Teba shows up in an area, and now you're like together. The two of you are working together towards something. If you go on that quest line, because again, it happened in Ghost of Tsushima. The NPC is with you. You're going along with. I want that. I want to feel these characters in this world. I want to be with them and experience with them. Yeah.
The more Sidon, the better. I'm here for it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I want to go on an adventure with it. We're going on adventures. If we don't, it's going to be so sad. Yeah. Well, if there's nothing else, I think that is going to do it for this spoiler mode. Thank you for both of you for joining me here. Before we sign off here, I want to give you both an opportunity to let our listeners or viewers know if they want to follow you to check out more of your stuff. So, Roger, where can our viewers and listeners check you out?
Sure. You could find me at RogersBase literally everywhere, on YouTube, on Twitter, on Twitch, and on Instagram. I actually think I'm going to go record a video right after this talking about Zelda characters in Smash Brothers. So by the time you're watching this, that video will probably be up already. And I did a full... No, I'm kidding. Oh, yeah, absolutely. There you go. There we go. We got to do some collab discussions now. Sure. But also, if you're interested at all in watching my experience playing through Age of Calamity, by all means, go check out my YouTube channel. They did a full playthrough. I cried over Terraco. I screamed over the future champions coming back, and it was a lot of fun. So, yeah, thanks for having me.
What about you, Tris?
Yep, so you guys can find me on Twitter at ToonTris, but for the most part, I'm a member of GameXplain, so you'll see me making a ton of content over at GameXplain. I also do a lot of our streams on the Twitch channel for GameXplain, since that's something I used to do a little bit of before joining. I constantly doing things related to Zelda. That's actually my favorite video game series, so I'm constantly doing things with that. I want to say a good 90% of the Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity content on GameXplain I did, so you'll actually see, if you look at anything related to it, if you need the guide for all the Koroks, I have that. Like, I did a ton of content for the game that I'm not tired of it, clearly, because I did all this. I've been talking about this game like all week with tons of people. It's been really, really fun. But yeah, thank you for having me. And if you guys need to find me in any way, just GameXplain or Tune.
I'm gonna watch your guide right after this, playing some more Age of Calamity to find the Korok seeds.
Also, thank you, Brad, for joining me and for getting your way through this game pretty quickly. I'm glad you got to do that. In prep for our inevitable massive Breath of the Wild.
Well, whenever there's something with Zelda, you and me always have to talk about it.
I know.
So always gotta make time for it.
Such a good series.
Yeah, so good. Well, thank you, everyone, again. Thank you to everyone who submitted your questions. This time was all our dollar patrons. If you're a dollar patron, you get access to many of our exclusive shows and shows that are sometimes on a delay, like this episode of Spoiler Mode. So if you're a patron who's watching it, thank you for your getting a little bit of early access this time. For everyone else checking this out, thank you for supporting us, checking out this video. Hopefully you like it. And we got plenty of other spoiler modes that you can go check out as well. And if you're a dollar patron or up, you can check out most of those as well. So, and then plenty of other exclusive shows like Hunting Hubers going on right now. Just kicked off if you want to check that out, and we do those every so often. So thank you very much. Until next time, I'm going to do my trademark saying here. May the way of the hero lead to the Triforce.